Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and privilege to welcome Mrs. Sonia Gandhi back to the India Today conclave. May I please request her to come to the stage. When you came to us last, Madam, in 2004, you spoke quite prophetically of the choice India had, an aggressive, exclusive nationalism or a pluralistic, inclusive one. You warned us of the possible danger of the closing of the Indian mind despite economic liberalization, and of the importance of blending new alliances with old identities. Many things have happened since. The Congress Party went on to win the general election just a few months later. She became the chairperson of the UPA, listened to her inner voice, made Dr. Manmohan Singh Prime Minister, and well, we all know the rest. Earlier this year, she stepped down as the president of the Congress Party after serving 20 long years. No mean feat in a world with shortened attention spans and even more abbreviated loyalty quotients. Madam, you once said power in itself has never attracted you, nor has position been your goal. In fact, you once told your son that power is poison. But destiny is an implacable force. It placed you in the unique position of defending the party which your family has given its life to. Destiny has tested her many times, most publicly and harrowingly, when her beloved mother-in-law and equally beloved husband were tragically taken away from her. But she has shown uncommon will and inordinate strength to fight against all odds for what she believes in. Madam, you, the accidental inheritor, have become the grand old party's prime protector. As chairperson of the UPA, Mrs. Gandhi managed 19 party coalitions between 2004 and 2009. And again between 2009 and 2014 as the manager-in-chief of a 10-party coalition. Keeping egos in check, handling contradictions, ensuring smooth working, the once reluctant politician became the great unifier. The second UPA government may have descended into paralysis and corruption, and it was duly punished by the people, but the verdict was accepted in the great democratic tradition of this country with grace and gravitas. She has withstood the worst abuse with serenity and accepted the highest praise with just a smile. She's been at close quarters with the height of power as also the depths of powerlessness. She has seen the greatest loss and sweetest victory. Through it all, she's been supreme leader, mother courage, the ultimate negotiator. I'm certain if your much-loved husband, Rajiv Gandhi, could see you today, madam, he would be proud of you, of your commitment to the family and your allegiance to the party, and for embracing politics, the very thing that was once your greatest fear. To Congress's premier torchbearer for 20 years, Mrs. Gandhi is now the chief mentor. It's a role I am sure she will perform, as she has all others, with a sense of service, selflessness, and sacrifice. She will need all three qualities in full measure to combat the situation her party is in now. The grand old party is a shadow of its former great self. Her opponents talk of a Congress Mukt Bharat, and if the recent results in the Northeast, once considered a Congress bastion, are anything to go by, that vision is rapidly becoming a reality. You and your party, madam, face serious challenges on every front. It's a task in which the new Congress president I believe, needs your help. And though you have announced your retirement from the party, I'm glad to know that you will continue in politics. And I'm sure if there's one thing we've learned in politics, at least I have as an observer, it is this: it's a mistake to count anyone out, least of all you. Thank you again for coming to the India Conclave. May I now request you to make your keynote address. Thank you.
Mr. Arun Puri, the India Today family, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you, Arun Puri ji, for your introduction. I'm not too sure I fully deserve it, but anyway, thank you again. Some weeks ago, I took a step back from duties of almost 2 decades as president of the Congress Party. I thought this would relieve me for some time at least from having to appear before an audience, a task that was always a stressful one. Public speaking does not come naturally to me. Perhaps that is why I was once described as more a reader than a leader. But Arun Puri and his colleagues are persuasive, and this is a very prestigious conclave in a city that reflects the spirit of Indian enterprise. So here I am, just a congresswoman now, speaking for myself. Your theme this year is the big churn, and I have been asked to share my thoughts on reimagining India. True enough, the whole world seems to be in the grip of an epic upheaval. Technology and connectivity are colliding with inequality and insecurity. Societies everywhere are being rapidly and profoundly changed. This is true of our country as well. Our people are increasing impatient, ambitious, aspiring, and aware. Our institutions are still evolving and need to be revitalized. But you will surely agree that governance in the decades since our independence has seen a continuity and direction rooted in the legacy of our founding fathers and a few founding mothers as well. We always seem to forget the founding mothers. Yet today, we are presented with an alternative and indeed regressive vision of who we were as a people, what we are, and what we should be. This reimagination is based on a distorted perception of our history, and it is a fatally flawed view of what will secure our future. Ours has been an open, liberal democracy. It has been representative and participative. It has been fueled by political competition with due regard to rules, traditions, and conventions. Our open, liberal democracy has strengthened the bonds of unity without imposing uniformity. Our republic has not just been accepting of different points of view, but has encouraged debate and discussion. It has allowed for disagreement, dissent, and protest. It has demonstrated its capacity for dialogue and compromise. For years, our public discourse has been anchored in decency, reason, and argumentation, and not in invective, innuendo, and abuse. What has made our democracy precious is conversation, not monologues, accountability, not shunning any form of public questioning and interrogation. But, ladies and gentlemen, our country, our society, our freedoms, all are now under systematic and sustained assault. Make no mistake about it. This is a well-thought-out project, long in the making, to refashion the very idea of India. It involves rewriting history, falsifying facts, slandering nation builders, and fanning prejudice and bigotry. I would like to ask, if I may, was India really a giant black hole before the 26th of May 2014? Did India march to progress, prosperity, and greatness begin only 4 years ago? Is this claim not an insult to the intelligence of our people? This deliberate unwillingness to acknowledge and commend what our country has achieved is nothing but arrogance. This cynical running down of our past accomplishments, which have been a huge collective endeavor of the people of India, is nothing but conceit. It is not here a matter of taking credit. It is simply a matter of recognizing India's strength and strenuous efforts over the past decades. This is not a political forum, but it is a forum where politicians do come and speak on national issues. So I will share with you my growing anguish and indignation. The question we must ponder is this: what has been happening since 2014, both in substance and style? We should all be seriously concerned at how the foundational principles and values of our Constitution are being willfully shredded. Callous remarks about changing the Constitution point to a deliberate attempt to subvert the essence of India that it enshrines. Provocative statements from the ruling establishment are not random or accidental. They are part of a dangerous design. The evidence of this new and deeply troubling direction is there for all to see. Fear and intimidation are the order of the day. Alternative voices are being silenced, literally, in far too many cases, through violence, even murder. The freedom to think for oneself, to differ and disagree, to eat according to one's choice, to meet or marry according to one's wishes, all this and more is under attack. Where amity and harmony were encouraged, religious tensions are being fueled. Vigilante mobs and private armies have been let loose with state patronage. There is shocking insensitivity to atrocities on Dalits and women. Our society is being polarized with an eye to winning elections. So what is happening to the India that we inherited and that we have cherished? But, ladies and gentlemen, something even more sinister is taking place. The Indian tradition and way of life has for centuries been many-streamed, and all-encompassing. That is being subverted. Our very social DNA is being re-engineered. The resulting churn will unleash pent-up frustrations, resentment, and anger with devastating consequences. Individuals can mesmerize for a while, but our republic needs impartial and robust institutions. Long-standing precedents that have stood the country well are being violated. Parliamentary majority is being interpreted as a license to stifle debate and bulldoze legislation. Political opponents are being targeted through the misuse of investigative agency. The judiciary is in turmoil. Civil society is being silenced. University and students are being straitjacketed. Much of the media is being coerced away from its proper watchdog role, which is surely to expose misgovernance, scams, and frauds. RTI was brought in to enhance transparency and fight corruption. Today, that law is in cold storage. The RTI and RTI activists are being killed. Aadhaar was to be an instrument of empowerment. It is being turned into an intrusive instrument of control. We want to be a knowledge-driven society, but just look at how the scientific temper is being mocked. The noise of politics is the music of democracy, yet that very noise is now being muffled. The pretext is to make India a $10 trillion economy. But yes, of course, we need to move fast, but fast, F-A-S-T, cannot stand for first act, second think. Acronymitis can be very contagious. We have seen time and again in the way decisions have been taken, whether they have to do with the economy or our relationship with neighbors, or the handling of vital security issues and cross-border terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me for asking too many questions. I only have 2 left. So, does maximum governance mean minimum truths? Does it mean that alternative facts take the place of uncomfortable reality? Take jobs, for instance. Everyone knows that the employment situation is grim. But all of a sudden, we are told that 7.5 million jobs were created in 2017. This claim, of course, has been widely debunked, but does that really make a difference? No, it doesn't, because as soon as one myth is demolished, another takes its place. I don't need to remind the audience of how the narrative kept shifting as demonetization took the economy downriver, or of the chopping and changing that went with the GST, a reform that was first stymied and then implemented in stubborn haste, or the belated recognition, although half-hearted, of growing farmer distress. Friends, it is not my nature to be a voice of gloom and doom, but we need to see things as they are and not to be taken in by skillful repackaging and lavish marketing. And I do feel encouraged. I am encouraged, in fact, because people are now beginning to question this reimagining of India. Reimagining India must entail a rededication to the core values and guiding principles of our Constitution, in letter and spirit, in precept and practice. Practice is what really counts. We need to reaffirm our resolve to protect and strengthen institutions and institutional processes. We need to acknowledge that while economic growth must be rapid, it must also be inclusive and sustainable. Most of all, we need to replenish the well springs of liberalism and pluralism that for so long have sustained our society. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we have so much to be proud of. India is a great country. It is a wonderful country. It belongs to all of us. Let us protect it and cherish it with all our might. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gandhi, for reminding us of the things we may have lost and what could be different, and reimagining India. If I may ask you a few questions. Firstly, I want to know, now that you've given up the presidency of the Congress Party, how do you feel? Are you relieved, overjoyed, nervous?
I am actually relieved. A huge sort of weight is now off my shoulder. I have much more time to do things which I could never do before, to read, perhaps to watch a movie. And I have a lot of work at home in terms of old papers belonging to my husband and some to my mother-in-law. And I'm trying to accessorize and then digitize all those papers. These are papers, for instance, letters that my mother-in-law used to write to her son, to Rajiv, in school, and his reply. So I think they are, well, from a sentimental point of view, they are important. They've just been kept for so long. I'm now trying to tidy them up.
But actually, are you going to stay out of politics? Because, in fact, you're hosting a dinner on the 13th, calling all the political parties for organizing a third front, maybe?
I am no longer the president of the party. But yes, I am the chairperson of the Congress, or the CPP in Parliament, of the Congress Party in Parliament. And I do sort of meet with, together with Rahul and some colleagues. We try to have regular meetings with, we call them like-minded parties.
Okay.
To see if we can work together. We have worked together in the past. In Parliament, there is a certain amount, especially in the Rajya Sabha, of coordination. Yes, I do that, and I think we are holding a dinner also next week with all these leaders who lead.
Are you hopeful that these parties who have, fought with each other quite bitterly sometimes, can actually get together because they see BJP as a big colossus which can't be beaten singly by any party?
Well, it is difficult for all the parties, including for ours, because while we can get together at the national level on some issues or legislations or issues, but at the ground level, we are opponents. So there is a lot of pressure from every party, from my party, from the party of another leader, like for instance in West Bengal, in many other states. So it is a difficult task, but I think if all of us think of the larger picture, if we really think and care for the country, then we should think, local other difference, which really deal with state politics.
What is the advice you have perhaps given to the Congress president, who happens to be your son, but he's the Congress president?
He is now the Congress president.
Do you give him any advice?
He's fully responsible. He knows what his responsibility are, and well, I'm there if any sort of advice or thing I can.
Do you volunteer it, or only when he asks for it?
Well, it can be both ways.
I know my children don't listen to me. Does he listen to you?
No, I think I try not to volunteer because, after all, we parents tend to always try to keep them under control. But I think it's not terribly wise to do that always. It's better to let them. I don't know. What did you do with your father?
He let me be. He let me be.
He let you be.
He let me be. Yes,
Good.
and I think it was the right decision.
That's why you are where you are, right?
But would you? I mean, Rahul Gandhi is taken up a very big post after 20 years. How do you see him? Is his style of management, you think, different from yours? Or are there any disagreements you have with him on particular issues?
Look, every person and every leader of a party has his or her particular style of working. So, he has his style. I had my style.
So what's the difference? I mean,
Not difference, because after all, the Congress party has certain policy, believes in certain ways. I think what he really is keen on, has been keen on, but we have always pulled him back, is to revitalize the party in the sense to have younger people, not to do away with the elders, but to have a balance of younger people and seniors. India is these days a very, very young country. Yeah. And I agree with him there. It's not going to be an easy task, but I'm sure he'll be able to manage.
But there's always been a feeling that that you, in fact, wanted the veterans to stay and he wanted young people to come in, and there's always been a kind of a tension there between the two.
He certainly has always, talked and wanted to have younger people, new people. If you do not have younger and new people, how is your party going to grow? That is his argument, a very valid argument. Then you have the elders or the seniors in the party who feel that, look, we have been struggling all these years, and now suddenly, what's going to happen to us? But in the last meeting we had, working committee, very recently, actually it was turned into the standing committee for the plenary, he clearly said at that meeting that he strongly believes that, yes, young people must be encouraged, must be in the party, but that does not mean doing away or, ignoring the seniors who have been in the party for long, who have worked and contributed to the party for long.
See, in 2004, Congress ruled 13 states and BJP only 6. And today BJP is in 21 and Congress is in 4.
Yes.
So BJP, of course, calls it Congress Mukt Bharat. What do you think happened? What went wrong with this kind of...
In 2004?
No, I'm saying this decline, that you were ruling 13 states and you're down to 4 now.
Yes.
Right? So what went wrong with the Congress party?
Well, first of all, we were in government for 2 terms, and definitely there was a certain amount of anti-incumbency. People felt perhaps they wanted a new person. There were other issues. And also, I think we were, in a way, out-marketed because we couldn't really, compete with the kind of, not propaganda, with the way under Mr. Modi the party went into elections.
So how do you intend to fix that?
Well, we have to. It's a challenge, but I'm sure that we'll be able to meet it.
So what are the other lessons for you for 2019 elections, which are, what are the chances you think of Congress Party in the coming general election, say next year? What is going to be different? What are the lessons you've learned from the last election, 2014?
Well, there are so many lessons. I can't begin to list them out here.
Just 3.
I think that our party has to really develop a new style of connecting with people.
Yeah.
I'm talking of at the organizational level. And then, of course, we have to also, look at the way we project our programs, our policies.
Well, a lot of your policies and programs, in fact, have been adopted by the new government. So,
NDA has adopted, but to begin with, they did, but then in some cases, they sort of, weaken certain programs that we thought were important. But, it is their take. They are in government now, and so.
So corruption was the main issue in 2014, I think.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
That was an issue, but I'm sure I'm going to be here misunderstood. But it was highly exaggerated. Now, in the case of the 2G, for instance,
right.
You must have
heard
recently what happened. Or, for instance, in the previous CAG,
right.
In our government, they came out with some humongous sum of money, which was supposed to have been sort of...
Yeah, 1,72,000.
Yes, but it was, there was a problem there. I think now everyone realized that it was not just highly exaggerated. And then the question that we can really ask ourselves, how come the person who was in charge of that institution was given a very cushy job right after? So, one must think about these things. And then, in the Gujarat government, I think the Oil and Gas Corporation or something it was called, the very institution, CAG, has found 20,000 crores, I don't know, I don't want to use a vulgar word for it, but of misuse
of funds.
Yes. And, but nobody is talking about it now. We try to take it up in Parliament, but invariably we are not allowed to speak. And that is why, unfortunately, we have to then start making a nuisance of ourselves and shouting, because anytime there is an issue, an important issue that we want to discuss, they find a way of scuttling our...
But actually, more often you see Congress banging the tables and shouting, and not allowing recently with the Prime Minister not being allowed to speak. Do you approve of this?
I agree with you, but there is a reason for it. When you have a genuine issue that you want to discuss, and you follow all the procedure, you give in to the speaker or in the advisory committee meeting, you give, as per procedure, what is the point that you want to discuss under which particular rule, we are just sidelined. We are not allowed. At times, we have even agreed to change the discussion under a rule which government wants. But even then, take for instance of late, just these last 3 days, we wanted to discuss the big fraud It's an important issue. It's an issue that is agitating people's mind. It is an issue that must be agitated in Parliament. We have simply not been allowed to speak.
But just before that, Prime Minister
yeah.
was trying to speak just after the budget, you remember, and he was not allowed to speak. You know, the
yeah,
Congress...
there's a reason for that.
Yes, what was the reason
for that? There is a reason for that. No, he spoke, but there was a noise from the opposition side. It's because when our leader of the party in Parliament, who is a senior person, pretty capable, he was trying to speak the previous day. The Treasury benches did not allow him to speak. They shouted and screamed, they called him names, and that is why.
So how is this going to be fixed? Because politics seems to become very acrimonious.
It cannot be fixed with the way the present government is running Parliament. It cannot be fixed. It's impossible, because they are not willing to allow us to speak. Now, what is Parliament for? Is it not a forum where all of us...
Yes, of course.
We might as well shut down and go home then, if you know.
But why aren't you...
And I'm fully aware, I am aware that people at large are constantly angry with the Congress because they feel they are shouting, they are making a noise.
Yes.
But there is a very serious reason for it. Parliamentary rules are not followed.
No, but there is, I'm sure, a way to do this in the back room, to come to some sort of a consensus, to say, okay, we'll hear you speak and you let us speak. How long can the country bear this?
The present situation is such where there isn't that kind of accommodating spirit. It is not accommodating, it is our right. It is the right of an opposition. I mean, we worked very well when Prime Minister Vajpayee was there.
So what do you see the difference between Prime Minister Vajpayee and Prime Minister Modi?
He had great respect for parliamentary procedure.
And Mr. Modi does not.
And the then speaker was what a speaker ought to be. So you ought to hear both sides.
So what is, okay, let me ask you a straightforward question then. What do you think of Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, as a person? No, that you talked about what maybe...
I've just read out the full Ramayana and you're asking me about Sita and Ram.
I'm asking you, actually, I mean, you said all what he's done, but as a person, because you've met...
I don't know him.
You don't know him?
I don't know the person. I mean, we see him in Parliament or occasionally at function, but I can't say I know him because there has never been, kind of...
So are you saying that this kind of acrimony which has come in politics now is because of the personalities involved? It's not because of any great ideological difference?
I do not want to comment on this, but I'm just saying that we were in opposition when Prime Minister Vajpayee was there. We were bitter opponents because it was the BJP, and things were also beginning a little bit not to be quite so. But we functioned well. Of course, there were disagreements at times, but on a whole, it was a much more positive way of, and there was give and take. There were, backroom kind of compromises when it comes to being allowed to speak, to debates, etc.
So you're painting quite a gloomy picture looking forward. That, I mean, this whole year we're going to see just this shouting matches going on between and no real debate happening.
I hope not, but what happened now is that the BJP supporters, like the TDP, the TRS, the Shiv Sena, have now started going into the well of the house and representing, shouting and screaming their own people.
So they've taken the role of yours, which is opposition, is it?
Yeah, so we sort of just, well, you know, I don't see, unless something major happens, I don't see
Much change.
much improvement in the situation.
So what do you think will be the main issue in 2019, in the general election, the next general election? What would you like to project as the main issue? As corruption was in 2014, do you think Mr. Modi has eliminated corruption, or will that still be an issue, or will be something else?
I guess, you know, the main issue with the BJP is that they made huge, fantastic promises, but what is being implemented? You know, they sold such a picture, such a positive picture, we'll do this, we'll that, we'll give jobs, I'll give you 15 lakhs rupees, and, you know, and there is great, I think, disappointment.
So what would be your...
And I really think that I am confident, really, that, you know, maybe, or no, I am confident, I must say, that the BJP Achhe Din will actually have turned into the shining India, which is what brought us victory.
What would be your earnest advice to Mr. Modi if you were to advise him?
But would he ask for advice?
Well, I'm asking you.
I mean, I don't think.
He may not ask for it, but I'm asking you, what would you advise him to the benefit of the country? What would you like him to do?
I wouldn't dare advise him. I'm sure he has people around him who probably advise him.
I know, but I'm saying you, sitting on the opposite side of the bench, would like to see things done differently. So if he was to give you an ear, what would you advise him?
No, he is the Prime Minister after all. I can't advise him, can I? Apart from the fact that I doubt very much that he asks any of our lot advice.
Will you be fighting the 2019 election from Raebareli?
Certainly the party, whatever decision the party takes about me.
Okay.
Yeah, the party
so if the president offers you that, you say that?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. And what is this constant cries of Priyanka wanting to join politics? Is that you're going to put an end to this, or is she going to come into politics?
Priyanka always comes out during the election to run, to manage at least my election.
I know, I've seen
she
her,
always
yes.
manages.
Yeah.
And also, I think last time, also part of Rahul's. So that is really
That's
what
her
she
role.
does. At the moment, she has these two big children who are doing exams, and she's very preoccupied with a lot of work. But it is up to her, really.
You don't see her joining once her children are grown up and gone to...
I mean, I don't see it now, but one never knows in the future. I don't know, really. Do you tell your children, do this, do that?
I do, but they don't listen.
That's it.
How do you react when Rahul Gandhi is attacked personally? You know, recently he's attacked about going to see his grandmother during the Northeast elections. Is that
that's not exactly how it is. Yes, he went to see his grandmother, but he had done all his round of electioneering, and during that gap, post-electioneering, while you wait for the results, then he went, yes, for 3 days.
Do you see that as an issue? Because BJP leadership seems to be a 24/7 leadership. All the time they're thinking, breathing, living politics. Rahul is inclined to take breaks or go away from it. Maybe that's a different culture at the moment he's in Singapore. Is that
Yeah, but he's in Singapore for work. He's not in Singapore.
I know, but his constituency is India, really. His constituency, in a larger sense, is India. So, what I'm saying is that the Modi government is a 24/7 political machine, and Congress seems to be a far more relaxed mode of operation. Do you see that an issue, or is this the way we will continue?
I don't see that as an issue at all. Of course, now he's become the president, but I can tell you there are plenty of people in our party who take off for holidays in between.
That's fine.
Because we never knew, you never hear about it. I know about it. You never hear about it. That's fine.
Let me take you back a little bit in terms of, because it's something which has always fascinated me, is your transformation from what you were and what you've become. I think this is one of the greatest transformations I've seen in my 40 years in journalism. It's you, and now recently it's Naveen Patnaik. That means you started off with somebody who was not even, I remember in one interview you were saying that when you first met Mrs. Gandhi, Rajiv presented you to Mrs. Gandhi, that she spoke to you in French because you were not even comfortable in English at that time.
Yes, because I had just gone to Cambridge and my English was absolutely nowhere. I was just beginning to learn English, and yes, she spoke to me.
So from that time to the point where you become a political leader, you speak in Hindi, you give speeches in Hindi, what has been the biggest challenge in this journey for you?
Well, there have been many challenges. Hindi, my mother-in-law used to try and ask us to speak Hindi at home. But then there was a very small Hindi institute in Green Park in Delhi.
Right.
And I attended some courses there. But I must say, then I sort of neglected our bad habit of speaking English more than Hindi, which I wish it was the other way around. But then I slowly, because of that initial course, where I learned, of course, writing, reading, and grammar and all, because of that course, it's that course that helped me when I had to speak publicly in Hindi. It was very difficult at the beginning, but slowly I learned. Public speaking is not my forte, as you all know.
No, but you've done very well.
And in Hindi is even more, for me, stressful.
And this reluctance of being
But I speak Hindi.
Yes, you speak very well.
Yeah.
No, this reluctance of even discouraging Rajiv Gandhi to enter politics.
Yes.
There's always been a resistance to it, of you entering, even when you wanted to enter politics.
Yeah.
Now you've overcome all that. I mean, you enjoy it now, is it?
There were reasons for me not wanting my husband to join politics. Because you see, when you are in politics, then if you are a genuine person and if you genuinely care, then everything comes second. So with Rajiv ji, in those days, he used to have a few flights, and it was more of a leisure time, and we had small children. We were a very happy family. And I felt that, if he joined politics, then it would be the end of that. But then, of course, after my mother-in-law was assassinated, I really didn't want him to take that position. I suppose it was perhaps selfish, I don't know. But I also felt that they would have got him also,
They would have, sorry?
They would have killed him.
Oh.
Because that was soon after my mother-in-law's, and there were lots of threats. And I was right, it did happen.
You mean you had a premonition?
Yes.
Really?
Not a premonition, but I knew what was going on around us, and kind of, So I thought, I felt that, but at that point it was inevitable. He could not have stepped back because he was already in politics.
And after his tragic death, and you getting into politics, that must have been a very difficult time for you. I mean, what went through your mind at that time? Shall I join? Shall I not join?
I spent, I think, 6 or 7 years to myself. I wasn't. There was no way I was going to get into politics. I think also my children needed my. But it wasn't just that. I just did not want to join politics. And then, after 6 or 7 years, when the Congress was going through a very difficult time. Some people were leaving the Congress. And so I really felt that I was being sort of a coward not to at least try to do something to see if I could help the party. And that's how it went.
That's what got you.
That's how it went.
Do you think the Congress party would survive without a Gandhi at its leadership?
Gosh, that you have to ask the party, I suppose.
What is your opinion? Meaning, from my side, I think that it would all splinter up.
There has been a
because nobody seems to agree on any one leader.
There has been a tradition in our party. We are all elected, as you well know, democratically. Yes. Now you see in other countries, whether the Bushes, whether the Clinton, or even at the state level. I don't know.
But I mean, you know, the Democratic Party survives the Clintons, the Republicans survives the Bushes. But will the Congress Party survive without the Gandhis? Will there be is there a chance of any other leader being there?
Why not? In future, they may well be.
So you don't think you're the only glue which is for the Congress Party?
This is a tough question. There are many congressmen out here, you can ask them.
The other thing which I always...
And women.
The other thing I always wondered is how when in 2004 you got elected, UPA came back and you chose Dr. Manmohan Singh as the Prime Minister. How did that relationship work? Because it was said that Prime Ministers are in office, but you were in power. So you had this diarchy, meaning there was a kind of, he was always overlooking his shoulder. Can you run a government like this? And why didn't you become Prime Minister?
But I don't think it was that kind of situation.
Why didn't you become Prime Minister?
Because I think Dr. Manmohan Singh would have been a better Prime Minister than myself.
But you haven't tried.
Without trying even, I knew my limitations.
What do you see as the future of the Congress Party in, say, the upcoming elections? Say there's going to happen in Karnataka, soon it'll be in Madhya Pradesh. Are you very hopeful of that?
Yeah, in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. In Rajasthan, recently we won 2 by-elections, or 3, 1 assembly and 2 Lok Sabhas. And then recently, some local elections we did very well in Rajasthan. We won 2 assembly elections now in Madhya Pradesh, though not much was heard about it. And of course, now Karnataka is a very important state for us. We have to do our best to return to government. Our people there they're quite confident, but I always feel it's better not to be too confident. You have to carry on working very hard till the very last day.
The Congress Party has always been a hold-all of all kind of ideologies, right? I'd like to know, what is your thinking? What is your political philosophy, economic philosophy? Where do you stand? Do you stand to the left? Are you a Nehruvian socialist? Are you in the center? What are your views in terms of the role of the public sector, how the country should be run in terms of a political philosophy?
Well, I am a congresswoman, and I believe that growth is important, progress, development is very important, and at the same time, it is as important to see to it that those who are less, who don't have, are also receiving support. Because you can't have just one island, as you rightly said, of very wealthy people and then a huge number of people very poor. Because that calls for social, there could be unrest, for social unrest. So a balance of the two.
Because, I mean, your government, your party was responsible for the first liberalization of this country.
Yes.
And
during Manmohan Singh ji, we had the highest growth ever, I think, 7.5
or so.
Something.
But you were also a government which gave a lot of rights to people, right to education, right to food. But the question is that if you don't have the money...
That's precisely, no, I think that was a myth. There was plenty of money. There's always plenty of money to lend to big daddies, if I may call them so.
Okay.
And whenever there is, a requirement for money for the poorer section, there is always a noise. The money is there. The money was there.
So, I mean, let's look at
an excuse.
specific issues like nationalized banks. Would you like to denationalize some of these banks?
I wouldn't dare to comment on this because as of now it's not in my it's not my call. But in the past, I'm talking in the past, they have served the country well. I mean, a poor person could go, or not so poor, middle-level person could go and borrow money.
But we're seeing that the chickens have come home to roost, that a lot of the money which, besides being given to large industrialists which they don't pay back, there are, of course, in the past been loan melas, there's been loan waivers, so it's all taxpayers' money going down. Is it an efficient way to run the economy?
I think you would have to ask an economist, Chidambaram, for instance.
Okay.
Dr. Manmohan Singh, for instance, even better. I am not really an economist. I can't. But there are flaws, and I think probably some work is needed to get rid of those flaws, to ensure that,
Do you believe in minimum government? Meaning government should play a less intrusive role in people's lives?
I believe in a balanced government. I don't believe in minimum, maximum. Balance is always the best way.
So if you were to come to power in 2019, what are the things you would do which you didn't do in the 10 years you were in power? What is it that you would offer the people? What would be the agenda?
I think we offer the people a great deal during the UPA government. It is just that the opposition was much better at their communication, and we did not communicate enough to the people about all the good work that was done.
Yeah. So marketing, you're saying again?
Yes, marketing. But marketing is very expensive, isn't it?
But Congress has never been short of money before.
Well, you can see the other side is
Are you broke now?
The other side is not short of money. I won't go into that. But I think if we proceed in the same way, with the same, not exactly the same programs, with some innovation on the programs that we had, I think basically it should be that, and then of course lots more.
You haven't thought of really what would be your main
No, they are
push
working. In
in
fact,
on
there
2019?
are various groups now who are sitting down and working out on a manifesto, consulting different section of.
I mean, Mrs. Gandhi had Garibi Hatao, the BJP,
No.
Bajpayee government had Shining Movement, Modi government had Achhe Din, right? So what's 2019 for yours?
I can't say because we have to work on that. We haven't finalized on. But slogans, I'm not too fond of slogans and empty promises and, jumlas kind of thing.
Okay.
What do they mean? What are these jumlas? If you go into elections, you don't lie to people and sort of offer to them or tell them that you are going to do things for them that you would never be able to implement.
But all politicians do that.
Many politicians do that. I always tried not to.
Not to, okay.
But yes, it is very, very, with politicians, it's some of them do it. Well, in this particular party, this is what they're doing. Because even today they're making promises, which they know they cannot implement.
Tell me, what do you see about the Congress with Rahul in Gujarat elections, started visiting a lot of temples, and now we're looking at something called a soft Hindutva from the Congress side. Is this a deliberate effort from the Congress to kind of change its image?
The BJP has managed to sort of, in a way, I would say, I don't say brainwash because that's a bit of a rude word, but has managed to convince, to persuade people that the Congress party is a Muslim party. Now, I ask, in my party, the great majority is Hindu and different, section of, but yes, there are Muslims. So I fail to understand this, branding us as a sort of Muslim party.
Well, I mean, there's been appeasement.
We have always been to temples. When I used to travel with Rajiv, I don't know, we used to go, wherever we went, there was always at least one major important temple which we would visit. But we never made a show of it. It was quite natural, you go and... in the case of Rahul, it's gone, yes, to many temples. It's gone before to temples.
So you're saying there's no shift in this, or no deliberate thrust in this direction?
I don't think so.
In order to kind of say, okay, BJP cannot monopolize this whole Hindutva movement, we're also part Hindu.
Maybe there is a bit of that. There is a bit of this. Because we have been pushed into a corner with that,
Right.
And so, perhaps rather than going to a temple quietly, then maybe, yes, a little more of focus on that, public focus on that.
You have any views on what's happening to Karti Chidambaram in terms of this investigations?
No, I think
and
the
so
whole
forth?
thing is in court there. But this I can say, as I said in my speech, that one of the means of, sort of getting at people, at opponents, we have seen with this government, is to start cases on them. Now, I don't know the details, the particular details of this, but there have been so many other cases where we know that there is nothing, but they then, once you go, the CBI can very easily find anything in even the perfectly clean situation.
Last question, Mrs. Gandhi, is give us what you see the future as. Are you optimistic about India? You think India has a great future? regardless of which political party you're
No,
from.
I am very optimistic and I have great faith in the people of India. But I am worried, as I have said in my speech. I am worried. At the same time, I am optimistic. I know that will come through.
And if the BJP comes back in 2019 or NDA comes back, would that be
Well, let us see.
change your outlook?
No, we are going to come back. We are not going to let them come back.
On that note, thank you, Ms. Gandhi. Thank you for your frank views and thank you for being with us at the conclave. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
It indeed has been. Mrs. Gandhi, it's been a real pleasure to have you today here and address the first session of the India Today conclave. Reimagining India, the agenda of change. May I please call on stage Kali Puri, the Vice Chairperson of the India Today Group, for a small token of our appreciation for your time today. A big, loud round of applause for the former Congress President, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. And it'll be wonderful if the claps get a little louder, isn't it? One last loud round of claps.